Okay, welcome back to Awakening Philosophy, Intro to Philosophy, and reading Parmenides. So far, where we're at is Parmenides has outlined what philosophy is, specifically to do with the real beings. The power of philosophy is the power of dialectics, and he's asked Socrates how is he going to approach philosophy himself. And Socrates says, I have no idea. He says,
What?
He says what? So we're going to get into the text and see if Parmenides throws us a lifeline. Because if we're here interested in philosophy, we also want to know, how can we approach philosophy? How should we relate to philosophy? How should we make use of what he shared with us about what it is and its power? Let's get stuck into the text. What then will you do in relation to philosophy? In what way will you turn your mind if you are ignorant of these particular ideas? Socrates replies, at the present time, I do indeed appear not to see in what way at all. Parmenides, for prior to exercising yourself, O Socrates, you should endeavor beforehand to define what is beautiful, just, and good, and each one of the ideas. For just now the following also came to my mind while hearing you dialogue with Aristotle here. Therefore, on the one hand, the impulse by which you are impelled towards the Logos is beautiful and divine. You may be sure of that. Whereas on the other hand, thou must also collect thyself. Interesting. Just removing some highlighting here. Thyself, we can recognize from the Delphic Oracle, the maxim that these people lived by, know thyself. So there's some sort of collection of thyself. You must collect yourself, thyself, together. Thyself, the highest part of the self, by exercising more in that way that appears to be useless by the multitude, the many, all those people with their objections living on your street. Exercise in that way that appears useless by the many, and is called by them empty talk. For you do not, while you are still young. For if you do not, while you are still young, the truth will utterly elude thee. All right, we can relate to this, can't we? Pretty much most of what we've heard about philosophy and its power, well, we haven't quite yet discovered the power. Oh, we've seen the parts of the dialectic. It's not common, is it? It's not something we normally think of or talk about. So we could recognize the objections that Socrates was facing. And here he's saying, by the way, you got to do that which the many, full of their human opinions, say appears useless to them. They call it empty talk. You got to do that. If you don't do that while you are still young, the truth will utterly elude thee. How important to us is the truth as philosophers? Up there, the very top. Collecting yourself together, number one, and exercising. In that way that it appears useless and empty talk to the many. Sound alright? Are we in? What then, O Parmenides, is the way of this exercise? How the heck do we do that? We say,
What?
the way is just that which you heard Zeno practicing. Remember he'd heard Zeno going through his logos, the essays that he'd written. Apparently there are many, and each one had their own hypothesis. And Socrates asked him about the first hypothesis in his first logos, his first essay, about likeness. the way that you heard Zeno practicing. Except that I was also quite pleased with this and what you said to him. Because you would not allow him to look upon the wandering that exists among the objects of sight, nor the wandering that exists in relation to them. You didn't allow him to talk about physical things with the objects of sight. And that was good. But to consider according to those which one can especially grasp especially by the logos. You see, this is why we've been talking about the logos so much. And wanting to learn it and develop it. All the things we've seen so far. And in this way, one would be led to see the ideas. Right. Not through the senses, but the grasping by the logos, where we can see the ideas. Socrates. For it appears to me that in this way it may indeed be shown without difficulty that the beings experience both like and unlike, and anything else that exists. Remember, it exists, a kind of existence, an eternal existence. So this is what Socrates responding to his puzzle. Remember what he said to Zeno? He wouldn't let Zeno talk about physical things and how the mind wanders between sense observation to sense observation, all the things we can get distracted by in the physical world. I want none of that, says Socrates to Zeno. I don't want to see how I am both like and unlike. I am unlike you, but I am like myself, or my hands are many, but I'm also one person. That's one and many. I want to know what the ideas are that we grasp through the logos. Here he is saying, oh, well, if we do this in this way, Parmenides, I haven't done it yet, but from what you hear, I can say, in this way, it can be shown without difficulty. I can answer my question. It's going to be easy. Got a lot of confidence that the beings experience both like and unlike, and all that, anything else that exists. He's thinking, oh, well, this will really answer my question that I come here with. Parmenides, quite right indeed. But is it also necessary that besides this you should still also suppose the following, to consider not only the consequences resulting from the hypothesis whether each idea self exists, whether each ideal self that's being hypothesized exists. Key word for us, hypothesized. What is a hypothesis? Hypothesis means if. If this is the case, this is the understanding that would follow about it. This is part of the logos. Because we might not be experiencing these things that he mentioned. The beautiful, the just, the good in each one of these ideas. We might not be there yet, but we can hypothesize if they exist so we can understand them. That's the exercise. But the many would say, what a waste of time. Not for us if we want to know the truth. So you are to consider not only the consequences resulting from the hypothesis whether each idea self exists, but also the consequences resulting from hypothesizing if this idea self does not exist. Do an exercise talking about what would follow if it exists, and also if it does not exist. If you wish to be more exercised in this way, which we do. It's the noblest quest to be on, right? With the greatest goals, the greatest treasures, and the greatest significance for our lives. Socrates, in what way do you mean? Thank goodness he asked that question. Parmenides, such as, if you should wish to exercise yourself in the same hypotheses which Zeno hypothesized. Great. So we don't have access to those Zeno essays, unfortunately. One of the things that have been burned by the many who have the objections and say this is empty talk. Not just empty talk, but they want to burn it. No longer we are going to pick up the game. So we don't have his essay, so what did he hypothesize? Let's go. He's going to help us out here. Number 1, if the many beings exist, what must result both to the many selves in relation to selves and in relation to the one? And again, if many beings exist, what must result for the one in relation to self and in relation to the many? And in turn, if many do not exist, to consider in turn what will result both in relation to the one and to the many, both in relation to selves and in relation to each other. That's the first exercise. What a gobbledygook word soup thing that is there for us to read. Partly because it's in a different language, but partly because we're not exercised in this way, right? The many consider it worthless. So let's see if we can unpack it. This is what we need to do. Strenuously labor, says Socrates. Let's get into it. So what do we have? So if many beings exist, that's where we start. If many beings exist, we can recognize this because we are talking about not many things, but many beings. So we could say if the many exists. If many beings exist, what must result both to the many selves in relation to selves? Okay, so we have these many selves. So self, honorific, right? Many selves in relation to selves in relation to, that stands for. And in relation to the one. So we've got many cells in relation to the one. That's interesting. The one. Interesting because earlier we talked about there being many cells or many beings, and each of them, like beauty, justice, likeness. They have their own existence because they're each one, or they're each the self. They're each a self and of the self. So there's a higher level that these all share in, called one, or self, that allows them to have their own one existence, or self-existence, or individual existence. We can recognize that pattern from what we saw earlier for the triad of lesser to greater to ultimate. Those who are familiar with fractals or math could recognize in this analogy the phi, or the golden ratio. Golden. Or phi, or Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci pasta. Which says what? Which says this, which says A is to B is to A plus B. What's A plus B? The whole. So a Fibonacci sequence is like so if you have a sequence and you're jumping in at, say, 1 is to 2 is to A plus B. This A is to B is to both of them together. Both of them together is 3. I think it starts off 1 is to 1 in the Fibonacci sequence, and then these two together gives you 2, and these two together gives you, so these two together, A is to B, 1 is to 2, 2 is to 3, and then these two together gives you, wait, these two together gives you 5, and these two together gives you 8, and so on. That's Fibonacci sequence, which we see in fractals and in patterns in our everyday universe, like shells and galaxies and flowers. We see this pattern represented in how life evolves and the patterns that life follows. So you've got the lesser, A, is to the greater, as to the ultimate, or the whole is another way of saying ultimate, A plus B. So why are we talking about mathematical stuff and patterns that happen to exist in the universe? Because earlier in the text we saw Socrates getting stuck in concepts or particulars, lesser, the physical particulars. Physical sense particulars. Right, this is where the many are. This is where most people on your street are. This is where Uncle Joe is, right? What happened to my... What happened to my sound effects? Oh. Okay, my sound effects are working. Are they? What's going on here?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
There we go. So that's where Socrates started. That's where most of us start in our current modern world. Lesser, the sense particulars, and we talked about there being there having to be the realm of ideas. This is what we're focused on. This is what philosophy is about. This is what he's defining for us. The realm of ideas. Or beings. And he said, even though these beings themselves must be ones, for them to have their own separate existence, so that we can talk about there being beauty, different from justice, different from likeness. They relate to each other in a certain kind of way, which we want to define with the logos and dialectic, but they all have their own existence. Therefore, there's something called either one that allows them to have a one, be ones themselves, or a self, allowing them all to have their own selfhood. So this is the lesser, greater, ultimate, or lesser, greater, whole. Triad that we want to look for. So we want to look for this as we go through the dialectic, as we go through our learning, as we go through Platonic texts, as we listen to Parmenides continue in his conversation. Keep looking out for these. Keep an eye out. Like a thief class adventurer can keep an eye out for traps, or maybe keep an eye out for hidden treasure chests. Okay, my sound effects don't want to be working.
Wow.
There we go.
Wow.
So where were we? If the many beings exist, we have the many selves in relation to themselves. That would be the beings in relation to the beings. What follows for the many selves in relation to the one? Wow. Where is he?
Wow.
How do they relate to this guy? Going to put this in our little essay that we make, that we exercise ourselves with. And again, keep going. If many beings exist, what must result for the one in relation to self? Interesting. Let's write that down. If the many beings exist, what must be the result for the one? These two come together. The one in relation to self. In relation to self. And in relation to the many. So the one in relation to the many. We're taking our time. This is slow moving stuff because hopefully by now we've seen how important this is and how significant it is, etc., that we have to put in some time and effort. It might not be a walk in the park, well, at least at the beginning, right, when we're learning, when we're starting to walk. And in turn, if many do not exist, to consider in turn what will result both in relation to the one and to the many, both in relation to selves and to each other. Let's write that down. If many do not exist, what will result both in relation to the one and to the many, both in relation to selves and to each other. What will result in relation to the one and to the many, both in relation to themselves and to each other. So we can recognize a pattern here, right? We got many in relation to itself and many in relation to the one. Many in relation to self, many in relation to the other, which is the one, the other one. We have the one in relation to itself, this guy here, and the one in relation to the many. So we see it has the same. Oh, I've been doing this without. I'm sorry for that. Let's go back. I was on the wrong screen. Why didn't somebody? There we go. There we go. There we go. There we go. Let's try that again. So if the many do not exist, what will result in relation to the one? The one. And to the many, both in relation to themselves and in relationship to the other. the other. And now we can look and see, okay, what patterns can we see here? What patterns can we see? Well, here we've got many selves, the many beings. So we're taking the selves of this realm, the many ideas or the many beings, we're taking them as a whole. If the many beings exist. Why? Because these dudes, everyone who went to my school, I don't know, most people in our world, okay? It's not a slide. We have to reawaken it, okay? Many people are only in the realm of the physical senses. That's all they think exists. And they're the ones with all the objections and all the opinions that say, shut up and don't waste your time in such a difficult sounding exercise. Like, why? Why even waste your time? They can't see the significance of this, okay? So they will say that these beings do not exist. So we have to start by saying, okay, is that true? We have to exercise our mind, our nous, through the logos, through our words, language, reason, which is the application of understanding. Understanding because it's hypotheses, if this follows. It's not knowledge, you don't know it yet. It's an understanding. These are the rational things that follow if it's true. We have to ask ourselves, hey, can these things exist? What happens? What's true if it is true? And what happens if it's not true? What kind of so in other words, what kind of universe would we live in if these ideas, these many ideas, exist? And what's the alternate timeline when they don't exist? If the beings do exist and if they don't. They're our two starting points, right? In white, if the many beings exist, that timeline, and if many beings do not exist, that timeline. If Spider-Man existed in this timeline, what follows? And if Spider-Man did not exist in this universe, what follows? We have to be, it's like we're writing our own Marvel universe, or cartoon or something, or movie. We have to create that universe. So we're creating. We're like artists in that sort of sense, but in the highest possible sense, okay? So take that, everything you know about writing, or you know about gaming, or you know about comics and movies, and do the same thing. It's like, what if the what if Marvel series, but anagogically. What's that mean? We take it to its highest. You could say the what if is the lesser. The what if comic book series or Marvel series is the sense particulars, and we want to move anagogically, move to the higher. Right, so if the many beings exist, create a universe, what follows? Specifically, these many beings, what happens in their world? How do they relate to each other? What kind of a universe, what kind of relationships do they have? This is mythology as well. If you wanted to, if you really liked the exercise you came up with and you thought, wow, this is really important because a lot of people don't understand that many beings exist. They're materialists or they're physical sense people, Stoics. But I want to communicate to them why it's important that they have to exist. I can take my essay and give each idea a character name. I can call the idea of beauty Spider-Man. I can call the idea of justice Thor. I can call the idea of goodness Captain Marvel. And I can create a story Like in my essay, I talked about how these ideas relate to each other, their relationships. But if I give them all personification, metaphor, character assignments, I can tell the same story about their relationships in a narrative. You could do that if you really like the exercise you came up with, or you wanted to share it with your friends, or hey, share it on this channel. Share it with other people on this quest. That activity is called mythology. This is the Platonic way of thinking about mythology. Why? Because Platonic or philosophical way. Because anyone can write a story about Spider-Man and Thor, and they do. Lots of people do. But if you use it in this particular way, anagogic way, applied to this sort of question, in this sort of universe, then you are engaged in Platonic mythology, which is just a name. We're going to call it Platonic mythology because it's a word that points to the way Plato and his friends used it, which is anagogic. That's what mythology is, representing these questions, this universe, this exercise that does what? Exercises your mind to awaken the power of the dialectics so that you can grasp these ideas for yourself through the logos. We've gone through this. We've talked about this. So, if you've got a friend and you really care about him or whatever, and he seems like a good guy, say, let me show you this essay. You know how you're stuck in this world and no one's ever talked to you about if there's anything higher than this world of the physical world that we see through our physical senses, like sight and sound and stuff. Let me show you what would happen if these beings actually do exist, like Socrates and Parmenides are talking about. That might not be convincing, because let me show you this sort of world if they don't exist. What would follow? What would happen to this realm if they didn't exist in this higher way? What would happen? What would happen to manyness? What would happen to likeness? What would happen to justice? What would happen to beauty if they didn't have their own existence? If they're all based on this physical world, what would follow? Well, if a beautiful thing got ugly in this world, and these don't have their own self-existence, would these things become ugly too? And then how would you have beautiful things down here anymore if there's no longer beauty, the pure idea of beauty itself? These are things that might follow. That sounds crazy, right? Beautiful Jenny who goes to your school. All of a sudden she gets into a car accident and she's not beautiful anymore. That's a sad story. Poor Jenny. Gets into a sad story and gets into an accident. She's no longer beautiful anymore. Does that mean the ideas are no longer beautiful? This is something that could happen in your universe that you're creating through this exercise. But we're saying, what would happen to if they exist and if they don't? Two separate timelines to the beings themselves and beings in relation to the one. How would they relate to their higher? How do they relate to each other? What is the relationship between this and this? So far, all we've been talking about really is how these beings are necessary somehow for our physical examples. Many toes, one person, like apples, beautiful puppies. So somehow these are the cause of, or somehow generative of, this lower level. Well, what haven't we done? We haven't really been talking about how this ultimate realm of the one or the self creates that. And we've asked Socrates, hey, what will you, Socrates, down here, do in relation to philosophy? We talked about the dialectics, and this exactly what we're doing now is what we're dialectics. But we haven't talked about how these guys relate to their cause? How do these beings relate to the one? What do they do? Do they phone it on a Tuesday? There has to be some kind of connection in some way between this guy to this guy and this guy to that guy. Are we curious? Do we want to know this? Of course we do. It's the noblest quest and the greatest game. So we better do some learning. So in other words, the philosophical journey is one that we live our whole lives. But it's not throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, like the way that we think about philosophy at the moment. It's not about just picking out what you like or just hoping to come across something you agree with. We need some sort of structure to use, to know where we're going, to know where we're headed, to know what we're looking for. How do we learn everything? Hey, maybe next week we get into a different Platonic text. There are so many ones that are so awesome. But let's say we read the Ion, which is kick-ass. I really want to read Ion soon. So what? What are we going to do with it? If we have this structure here, if we are, on the right screen, if we are creating our little essay and we're looking for understanding this, understanding how, if we read in the Meno, this is how the beings relate to each other. Because they're talking about a certain being. They're talking about motion. Oh, wow, cool. So now I can add to my universe this section about motion. But maybe I'll discover how motion relates to the one. Now I can do this other part of the universe. So we're developing a structure, a format that we can take with us and build our own story. We are, who's the Marvel guy? Stan Lee. We're all Stan Lee, but we're super Stan Lee because it's anagogic, remember? So we're super Stan Lees and we're developing this, our own essays, our own exercises, our own stories and narratives. That's the power of dialectics. As we go, as we learn. Now, there's probably going to be a lot about these sort of things in the Parmenides text itself. So as we go through this text, we're probably going to get a lot of cool details that we can add in to fill out our universe. Which is the exercise, which is what will open our mind to nous and ousia and knowing the true nature of reality and ourselves and being and the meaning of our existence and destiny and all those wonderful, wonderful things. It's really cool. It's the best adventure to be on. So we are getting the structure of what we're going to take with us as we go. How cool is that? So how do if the many beings exist, how do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the one? And also the alternate universe if they don't exist. If the many beings exist, how do the many selves, the realm of beings, relate to themselves? How do they relate to the one? How does the one relate to itself, if being exists? And how does the one relate to the many, if being exists? And likewise, if the many do not exist, the same thing, but the opposite. How will the many, like here, relate to itself and the one, self and the one, and how will the one here relate to itself and many? Same structure. So what do we notice? Because we're already, even though we're beginning the journey, we're already familiar with some logos tricks, right? Some skills. What can we notice? What structures of the logos can we pull out of this already? Well, what do you see? Which of our skill trees can we apply? Remember our skill trees? That branch out. Looks like a tree, but they branches. So we have one-handed skills with the heavy axe. We have with the short sword. We have two-handed weapons. Or dual-wielding weapons. We have three. We're Zoro from One Piece. We have three swords. We have this three-sword skill tree. We also can carry a sword with our toes, so we have the foresword. So look for ones, look for patterns of pairs, look for triads, and look for quadrads. And we saw one example of that over here. This is a triad. So this goes into our logos tree of triads. Add it. Look for it. So when you come across another triad and another text, you'll be saying, oh, I'm learning about how this thing's a triad, but maybe it connects to this triad. And you'll make new connections, and you'll see things, and you'll gain insights, and you'll level up. It's like when you have two skills and you combine them with each other to create an even better third skill. That's what we're doing here. I'm using video games and the hero's journey and anime and movies because that's the culture we're familiar with. And it's the same thing. It's the same as mythology, only our mythology is only in the sense world and the lesser. Our job as human beings is to elevate it up anagogically to the greater and then to the ultimate. In everything we do, in our interactions, in our relationships, in our spare time, in our media, in our humor, in our video games, everything. So there's nothing that's not meaningful. Our entertainment isn't lacking meaning. Our spare time and our free time isn't lacking meaning. There's nothing to be ashamed of with video games or with anime or with movies. Awesome. So long as you recognize its purpose within the whole, the ultimate. The whole. What's its purpose? As a metaphor to help us create this dialectic, to help our minds elevate to meaning. Where is meaning? There. And what do we do with the meanings? Remember, what do we do with the dialectic? We have to make sure that not only are we defining each of the ideas, we're allowing each of them to be of the self. So we take these meaningful beings and ideas and we apply it to the self. That's the ultimate level of meaning. The ultimate level of meaning. Remember, keeping our minds fixed. Using dianoia or understanding. Each idea is of the self. Define each of the beings. So in fact, culture, games, movies, anime, these things are fantastic. Of course they're fantastic in some way because otherwise they wouldn't have such a wide appeal. But they are also meaningful so long as you carry this with you. Use what you sense in the physical world to see what the archetype is, what the ideal is. That makes it meaning. That makes media meaning. That makes free time meaningful. And of course, you can open your ultimate destiny, the true meaning of all existence, the destiny of all men, the destiny of philosophers, the human purpose, if we can also apply it to the one. Now, that's cool, and we're doing it. So we're super Stan Lees. We're Stan Lees, but meaningful. Stan Lees, but anagogic. So, we saw the triad here. What else can we see? Use what you've seen so far and have a look at this and see if you can pull anything out. Notice a 1 and 2. Notice a positive and a negative. Sounds like our duad skill tree. We're starting to see. We're starting to recognize treasures. Good for us. There's a 2. Self in relation to its higher. There's another 2 here. Within the pair, within the duad, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4. There's our quadrad. Interesting. So what can we therefore say about our friend Parmenides? He's able to see in terms of two main categories. We can say that his duad skill tree is at a high level if he's gone all the way up, he's made connections, and he's able to use it to give fruit. Use it to give to our friend Socrates and us, who's a high-level adventurer within the duad seeing skill tree of the Logos. It's a good guy to read about, right? We'd be interested in his Logos, wouldn't we? Considering we can already recognize he can see through the duad skill tree at a high level. You know what you should do, Soc? To give him an exercise, us an exercise. He's helping us. Use this pair, if it exists and if it doesn't. Okay, great. I'm not going to stop there. I've used my fire spell. Now here's my ice spell. The 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use my quadrad skill. And really lay it out for you. So he has so we can see he's got a high level of Logos. Not just having it, but able to use it to benefit us. So keep that in mind, because we're Sherlock Holmes as well. We're gathering clues about the key characters in the story. Well, they're real people too, so not just in the book, but real people. Again, it's the meaningful Sherlock Holmes, anagogic Sherlock Holmes. This is the first exercise. This is just exercise 1. Let's go back to the text and see what else he says. So, make sure my microphone is on. It is. And then again in turn, the new exercise. One should hypothesize if likeness exists. Oh, aren't we talking about likeness before? Pull that one out. Why does he pick likeness? Why does he go for likeness? There are lots of ideas. We talked about beauty and justice. Why likeness? I don't know. It's a good question though. I hope I find out. So a lot of these questions I'm getting as I go too. So we're together. Why did they pick likeness out? I don't know, but I do know it's a question because it's not for fun. It's not a coincidence that he picked likeness out of all of the ideas. Why likeness? One should hypothesize if likeness exists or if it does not exist. Okay? Notice? Positive and negative? Duad logo skill tree? And what will result for each hypothesis? Again, hypothesis. What does hypothesis mean? Hypothesis means understanding and not knowledge. What's it based on? If. That's a hypothesis. If. It's our journey up. And when we get there, you might have those objections. Am I experiencing one of the beings? Is it real? Well, if it is real, this is what follows, because I have an if hypothesis. If it's not real, in this universe? Which universe makes sense? See how when you have these experiences, having these hypotheses will help you recognize what's true, recognize whether you're in a delusion or not, affirm the things that are true, and help you integrate and use and benefit from your insights. Or spiritual experiences, if you do meditation or yoga, or sometimes if you play sport or dance. You might have these higher experiences. Sometimes you might not recognize them when you have them. But we have these if hypotheses under our belts to help us. So, if likeness exists and does not exist, but will result for each hypothesis, both to the selves that are being hypothesized and to the others, both in relation to selves and each other. What the hell? Gobbledygook. We say,
What in the heck are we talking about here?
that's what we say. We say, what in the hell heck are we talking about here? So let's lay it out. Okay, if positive side of the duad, if likeness exists, and if likeness does not exist. Likeness exists or does not exist. What will result for each hypothesis, which universe, with which if universe Super Stanleys are making, both to selves that are being hypothesized and to the others, both in relation to selves and in relation to each other. So we've got the self being hypothesized, which in our case is likeness. Self being hypothesized, and to the others. And to the others. What others? Don't know. Because we could have two others here, right? We have these three realms: physical realm, the being realm, and the one self. In our first hypothesis, we related the beings to the one. So it crosses the divide here, crosses realms. But it sounds like, to me, he's talking about the other ideas. How does this one particular idea relate to all the other ideas? Oh, I've been drawing and I don't have the screen up. Right, we crossed the divide before by talking about how the beings relate to the one and vice versa. But it sounds like we're talking about within this realm of beings, pick out one, likeness, and how do they relate to the other many beings and how do they relate back? That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not sure. It's a question, right? We don't have to know for certain. We just keep the questions open. And often when we come across something like this, we keep both. It could mean how does that being relate to the other sense particulars? It's definitely not this way. The other examples of like things, like apples and like pencils, or like beings, or other beings. Okay. I think it's beings, but let's keep reading and see what we find. If likeness exists, what will result for each hypothesis, both to selves that are being hypothesized and to the others, both in relation to themselves and in relation to each other? What does that look like? This. Same pattern, but not talking about being to the one, but within being itself. So we can unpack this into our quadrad.
Wow.
Are we happy? Which is what? If likeness exists, number one, what can we say about what would follow for, what would result for likeness in relation to itself? Likeness in relation to others? Could be other things, but probably the other ideas, the other beings. And those others, because this next part makes me think it's to do with beings. The others in relation to others. So we're probably interested in beings, right? And finally, the others in relation to likeness. Or the self being let's fix that up. Being hypothesized. There's our quadrad. This is the second exercise. If likeness exists, likeness, what happens to likeness in relation to itself, likeness in relation to others, others in relation to themselves, and others in relation to likeness or the self being hypothesized. There's our pattern. Oh, and create the alternate universe if it doesn't exist. Number 3. The same logos must be applied to the unlike, to motion and rest, to generation, to dissolution, and to the existence and non-existence of self. So it sounds like you're saying, hey, that exercise you did with likeness, Do the same thing, but do it to unlikeness now, which is one of the other beings, one of the other self terms. Do it to motion. Do it to rest. Do it to generation. Do it to dissolution. And also do it for the non-exist if they exist and if they don't exist, if their self does or does not exist. And in one logos concerning that which should be hypothesized as always being and not being. And anything else that undergoes any experience whatsoever, one must consider the consequences in relation to self and in relation to each one of the others being considered, which anyone may set up for this purpose, and in relation to many, and similarly in relation to everything. Wow. A lot there. A lot to unpack. We're doing all right so far, but this one sounds like this one's giving me some grief. Do the same thing to unlike motion, rest, generation, dissolution, and to that whether they exist and don't exist. That makes sense. This next one is tricky. In one logos, concerning that which should be hypothesized as always being and not being, and anything else that undergoes any experience whatsoever, one must consider the consequences in relation to self and each one of the others being considered, and in relation to many, and similarly in relation to everything. Oof, what the hell does that mean? Let's look at this. We have a self-contained one here, right? Apply it to these things. Whether it, So our question is, well, does it refer to the self? Is it chopping levels? Is it going up to the higher level? Because we talked about the first exercise was to do with the one. How do the beings relate to the one and vice versa? So it can cross this divide here, cross the realms. So our question is, these ideas, how do they relate to the existence or non-existence of the self or themselves? The self of this or the self of this. Now, I think it's the self of this. Let me tell you why. Existence. In this depiction of the different realms of reality, this is reality, so it's beyond even reality. This is what exists. This is beyond existence. So I think what he's saying is the same thing twice. The existence or non-existence of the self. I think he then summarizes what he just says. So in one logos, in one essay, concerning that which you're hypothesized as always being. Which one of those? Any one of those you're hypothesized as always being, as having a non-existence or existence and non-existence of self. So hypothesized as always being, that's the hypothesis, as being or as not being, non-existence of self. And anything that undergoes any experience whatsoever. One must consider the consequences in relation to self. Hey, anything that you have that undergoes an experience, what is the consequence of the self of that as an idea? And in relation to any one of the others. Hey, pick out the others. Which one of the others being considered? So maybe you pick out unlikeness. And one of the others is rest. How does unlikeness relate to rest? Make rest one of the others. Consider that you can set up for this purpose. So you don't have to just do, when you are at the level of, when you're creating this exercise and you are creating a universe where likeness exists, you are saying, how does likeness relate to the others? If likeness exists, how does likeness, what follows for likeness in relation? How does it relate to, beauty? Well, if likeness exists, we can have, beauty can have a likeness to justice. If it doesn't exist in this universe, then we can't have a likeness between justice and beauty. So we'd live in a world, or in the world of beings, justice would be ugly or would not be beautiful. So you see what would follow if likeness doesn't exist? How could justice be ugly? So we're seeing the absurdities that follow. So you have to pick out another. Which one of the others are you going to look at for your exercise? Hey, you're creating, this is Spider-Man. How does Spider-Man relate to Batman? Pick out one. Or how does he relate to Superman? Or in the same universe, how does he relate to Wolverine? This is the mythology that we're creating. Pick out one of the others, one of the other beings that we're interested in. That's what he's saying here. Hey, relate it to the thing, to the self, and any one of the others which you're considering. Pick out one of the other beings. Relate them together. And in relation to the many and everything. How does it relate to the many beings that exist? By the way, we've already done exercise 1, which showed what would be true for if many beings exist. So we've established this. So now we've got this character here. Now we can use it for our next exercise. This is exercise 1. We've got likeness for exercise 2. Now we can combine them together and do something similar to likeness for, so what have we got? Let's write it out. This is exercise 3. If, that makes it a hypothesis. We've got unlike, or and motion, and rest, and generation, and dissolution, exist, what follows for the self being hypothesized? Any one of those? In relation to itself? Self in relation to each one of the others being considered. Others, each one that you happen to be set, that you may set up for this purpose. Each one you may set up. So pick your character. And in relation to the many. So that helps us out because we know the word many. Let's bring up the text so we can see that we're following along carefully. So apply it to these things, whether it exists or doesn't exist. The self doesn't exist, the self of those beings. Concerning that which should be hypothesized as being and non-being, if it doesn't exist, in one logos, do it for being and not being. And any of those other things, as any experience, hey, don't just stop at these. Pick out anyone. Beauty, that's an experience. Do that. But up to you, you can pick it out. But at least cover those ones. At least cover these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then you can do your own. Keep going if you want. Hey, create your own comic book series of using this. And then if you want to make it into characters of your own, you can. But this is the exercise that he wants us to do if we want to reach the truth. If you're not interested in the truth, I know, do something else. Be hard to go back, I think. If you're this far along in this video series and you've already stuck with it to this part, this is not easy. I mean, it's not common. It's not hard. It's not familiar. It takes a bit of thinking, right? If you're already this far along, I think it'd be hard to go back. But, I mean, you always have that choice. But if you're interested in the truth, according to Parmenides, the teacher of Socrates, this is what we need to do. So, pick out anything. So pick out anything. And pick out the other pair, the thing it's relating to, any one of the others that you set up. So you can pick out your subject and pick out your partner that you're comparing. You probably want to think of something relevant. Like a likeness might have a really close motion, and likeness might be tied together. I don't know. Up to you to think. Like maybe, oh well, motion is one of those ideas we talked about. So if motion doesn't exist, then how could something become like it if it can't move into a likeness? It's either going to be same or different. There can't be a likeness. So you might explain that in your essay. Again, we don't know these terms yet. We haven't got into what exactly any of these things are, really. I mean, we do know what beings are, the many beings. That's sort of taken for granted, but we will hopefully learn as we go through the text more information about these ideas, which we can use to populate this universe. We are just getting the structure. This is important. Often when you go to school to learn about philosophy, they don't give you the structure. They just throw crap at you. Hey, here's a book that Kant wrote. Here's a book that Hegel wrote, and all this sort of stuff. Well, where do I put it? Where do I hang this information? I need a structure to put this, to make it meaningful and relevant. He is helping us. He is being a good teacher in giving us that structure and showing why it's relevant. Here is the structure. I'm giving you the outline. I'm giving you what you should apply it to. And I'm explaining why you should care. Because it's the power of dialectics. that can awaken your soul up to the realm of pure ideas and true being. That's outside of time. It's a learning that extends beyond even this lifetime and is necessary to know what the true beings are if you're interested in beauty or truth or why you're here. If you want answers to these questions, where you came from, where you're going, and why you're here, this is what you need to do. So here is the coat hanger, the hook, or the, what do you call that? I guess coat hanger? Coat rack. This is the coat rack, the skeleton to which you can hang everything you learn onto, and this is why it's meaningful. Great. He's helping us out. He's helping us out. Thank you, Parmenides. So pick out any one of these, but make sure it's this lot and any one of the others that you're considering setting up for this purpose in relation to the many and in relation to everything. What does he mean in relation to the many? Well, we already know the many refers to the ideas. So any one of these many ideas you pick out in relation to themselves and in relation to everything. Any one of these others. The consequence in relation to self and in relation to others being considered, which anyone may set up for this purpose. In relation to many, the many beings, and similarly in relation to everything. Now, there's two ways of reading that I can see. In relation to the many and in relation to everything sounds like in relation to self, the many ideas of which we're picking as subjects, and everything sounds like the other ideas. So it does sound like self and other. But there's another way it could be a different thing. All of the beings and all of the things. So let's do both. That's what we do. If we have an option, take both. So we have in relation to each one of the others, in relation to self and in relation to each one of the others being considered. Oh, okay. No, I think I get it now. And in relation to the many, and in relation to everything. Okay, so in relation to the many, what are the many? The subject of our first exercises, which were all the beings. And then the self being hypothesized in relation to everything. What does he mean by everything? Let's have a look at the text and read it through again. Let's see if this helps us. Already we can see a difference. We have this one, the subject in relation to itself, which is the subject, the many selves, and then in relation to its higher, the one, crossing the levels, right? Then the one in relation to itself, and then run back in relation to the many. So, we can see a pattern developing here. Let's get this pattern outlined. Okay. This is going to be special. We've got enough to work with to establish, at least so far, based on what we've seen, a pattern for the dialectic. The power of the dialectic is what we're after. So let's see if we can see exactly what it is. We recognize it has the duad here. We've got the positive and the negative. It's got the quadrad, skill tree. But these are just words that tell us that we can see a 2, we can see a 4. But so what? I mean, it's cool. And we'll see it more, and we might see more 2s and 4s later that we can connect to this, but... So let's make the subject of our dialectic the self of the subject. So if the subject is the self, we can say, hey, if the self exists, and if the subject self, you should probably write that, the subject self exists, and if the subject self or self does not exist. Okay, so we've got that. Within that we have the self in relation to itself. Self to self. The self in relation to another thing. In this instance, it's the one. So we've got self in relation to another, other. Then we have that other thing that we've set up. In this particular instance, it's the one in relation to itself. So if we're calling this the other, and we're calling this the self, we can have 2 terms, self and other. How self relates to self, how self relates to other. How other relates to itself, or other relates to other. And finally, how other relates back to the subject, which we call the self. Let's get rid of all this messiness. What do you say, Owen?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
We're talking about the structure of the dialectic at its core.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow.
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 Self to self, self to others, others to itself, and other back to the self. That seems to be the structure here, for if it exists and if it doesn't exist. The same thing under here. Self to self, self to other, other to other, other back to self. If it doesn't exist. Let's see if we can apply this to... This was exercise 1. Let's see if we can apply it to exercise 2, which is down here. If likeness exists. So, what's the self? Likeness. That gets our self term here, likeness. If likeness exists, self in relation to likeness itself. We've even got the word self there, so self in relation to self. Likeness in relation to others. The other beings, we've said. Self in relation to others. Others in relation to others. I mean, that's literally the words we're looking for, so that's a good thumbs up. from Parmenides. He's helping us. Notice he didn't just give us this structure. He gave us kind of a word salad, not a word salad, that's not fair. He very precisely explained the exercises without actually telling us what is exactly precisely involved. Why? We have to do the work. Part of it. We are adventurers. We have to level up. In a game, every time you swing your sword, your one-armed attack skill goes up. We're swinging. We're exercising our mind. Awakening philosophy, which is what? Awakening our nous and our ousia that can grasp the beings through the logos and the power of the dialectics. We are swinging. That wasn't a joke. It was serious. Thank you. Others in relation to others. Others in relation to likeness, which we called the self. Of this, the self or subject of this. Same pattern, right? We're seeing a pattern here. What's the difference? Okay, that's what we're looking for. So part of the use of the logos is looking for likeness. Oh, maybe that's part of why he said do likeness. What do I mean? Well, likeness means something's not the same as it. It has some sameness, but some difference. If it was all the same, it would just be same. If it was all different, it would just be different. It's likeness, which is why it relates to our analogies. Let's have a look. We had an analogy set up somewhere on the page. To do with a shepherd and a king. Maybe we got rid of it. Can't see it here. We might have deleted it. Can't see it. So we talked about in and out. So let's do it now. Sure, I remember writing it. Maybe I accidentally deleted it. Oh yes, here it is. Shepherd is to sheep as king is to people. The shepherd, so this is an analogy, right? So we can see analogy. These things mean analogy. Let's scroll up a little bit more. The shepherd is like the king. Analogy means likeness. What does that mean? There are some things that are the same between a king and a shepherd. Cares for those under his care. Uses some sort of skill, maybe. Benefits. The king benefits the people like a shepherd benefits the sheep. This is what we look for. To understand the role of the king through this analogy, we look at what's the same, and we also have to distinguish what's different. A shepherd shears the sheep. Does a king shear his people? You could say, well, yeah, maybe taxes. That's what taxes are. Okay, a shepherd leads a sheep to eat some grass on a meadow. Does a king lead people to eat grass on a meadow? No, that's absurd. So that's what likeness is. And we're seeing that likeness, or rather analogy, is fundamental to all of our thinking here, right? We're using the lesser to understand the greater, and then using the greater to understand the ultimate. That's how we learn. So what's that? We learn through analogy, we think through analogy, we teach through analogy if we want to help others. So, what is analogy? What's the principle behind analogy? Likeness. So if that's how we do it, hey, if the first subject here, the first exercise is on the many beings existing, that can be very important. It might be the first thing we need to say. Like, why are we going to waste our time in philosophy if we can't show ourselves, reason with ourselves that such a thing exists?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
I'm talking about the beings. Why go through this exercise if we can't show that the beings exist?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
The many beings that have eternal existence.
Wow.
There we go. So we want to do this exercise first because we say, hey, well, if the many beings are not existing and the people, the many with their objections, the empiricists or the physical people, are right, then this universe follows. And you may notice something. You might notice certain absurdities that follow if the beings don't exist. To show you, hey, this universe would fall apart. But also, this universe I created, if the many beings do exist, makes sense or seems to align to truth a lot more. This is what we need to do to get started. Okay, so that's the being, the existence. But then how do we get there? Through analogy. We think. This whole hypothesis, this whole universe we're creating is an analogy. If the many beings exist, this follows. So we create a story or an essay or our logos that is like the truth of the universe. It's likeness. Creation is through likeness, but also thinking is through likeness, through analogy. And what's meaningful? Using analogy or likeness applied to the higher, which is called anagogic movement. So we use likeness. Likeness is very key. So what does he say do? Oh, now do one on likeness. Really nail down what likeness is. Do an essay, do a logos on likeness. If it exists and if it doesn't exist. Gotcha. Different subject, but seems to be the same structure. It's positive and it's negative and these four categories. But what's different about them? Well, this one is the many beings to the one. The other that we're setting up here is a higher dimension. The other is over here. The many beings, if they exist, how do they relate to other, self to other? But the other is a higher dimension. How does it relate to the ultimate? Whereas in the realm of this exercise, similar structure over here, but we're applying our subject, our self of the exercise, likeness to itself, that's the same, likeness to other beings. So how does likeness relate to the other beings? All the other beings that exist. How does likeness, you pick out one, like how does likeness relate to, well, if likeness exists, then we would have a likeness between beauty and likeness, or justice and beauty, or the beings could become assimilated to each other, or there could be a unity between them, or there could be a commonness. You're creating a universe explaining the metaphysical dimension rationally with reason based on what rationally follows in this universe, but also everything that you learn as you go through philosophy, as we read more texts, as we continue to read this text. Okay, so what's the difference? This one is of the same dimension. Likeness to other beings. Let's keep going. Third one. If unlikeness, motion, rest, generation, dissolution exist and don't exist, let's both exist and exist and don't exist. Actually, we shouldn't do that because it's two different universes. Itself, let's say unlikeness in relation to unlikeness. Itself in relation to any one of the others you set up, so unlikeness in relation to motion. Let's do that. Self to self, tick. Self to another. But here we have something different. Self in relation to many, all the beings. Self in relation to everything. What are the things? These are the things. So we have, like our first one, we have a realm jump. How do these beings like likeness and generation and stuff relate to everything, all of the things? So in relation to a particular being, in relation to the many, which is all of the beings, and in relation to all of the everything. So we're expanding our dialectic here. So we have three different kinds of others. We have others one. Let's go. Others one, others two, and others three. Others one equals a one being. Others two equals all, or a particular being. Others two, all beings as a whole, and three, all things. So we're expanding our structure a little bit, more encompassing. We've covered beings themselves, why they have to exist, likeness, which we're going to be using, and now let's use that to then do this one, which is like an even bigger universe. Self to self, self to others one, self to a particular being you set up, self to others. So Spider-Man, like, so it's a dialectic on Spider-Man, or Spider-Man will be how you mythologize your exercise, your dialectic exercise on generation. I want to know if generation really exists in reality itself, and in the highest sense. And I'm going to, after I finish, I'm going to turn it into a story, a comic book about Spider-Man. That's mythologizing, using myth to represent. And that's really important because it helps you communicate, but it also helps you remember It's a mnemonic device. So how does, let's say we're doing a generation, and the character that we're using to mythologize this metaphysical principle is Spider-Man. How does Spider-Man relate to Spider-Man? What does he do during his day? How does he make his suit? How does he feel about being a hero? Then the story continues. Pick out one of the other beings. How does Spider-Man then goes on his day, and he runs into? Oh, here's a good one. Who would Spider-Man run into? I was gonna say Wolverine, but he's a bit of a hardhead, isn't he? He runs into. I want to say Superman, but he's in a different universe, so I can't say Superman. But let's go with Wolverine. It just seems like that's wrong. Like, this is just an analogy. I don't have to be too specific. I'm trying to think of the Spider-Man movies and who he was in the Avengers. Captain America, right? Here we go. So one of the beings, let's say you pick out, how does generation relate to motion? So if generation exists as a pure being, okay, we got someone saying something clever in the chat. No, not clever. One of those objections. Okay, boring. How does Spider-Man himself relate to himself? How does he get his suit set up? What does he think about being a hero? Then you pick out one of the other ones. How does generation relate to motion? If generation exists as a being, then we would be able to have motion in development. Or the beings could have motion in how they could ousia, turn upon themselves and know themselves. All right? This would be something that you could learn as we go through this book or other books, and we could add to your essay. Add to it. Keep a document open. How are you going to turn your mind and do philosophy now that you realize that you're ignorant? Socrates says, I don't know. At the present time, I indeed appear not to see in what way at all. Parmenides says, for prior to exercising yourself, you should endeavor beforehand to define what is beautiful and just and good. Each one of these ideas. For just now, the following also came to mind while hearing you talking with young Aristotle here. On the one hand, the impulse which you have towards the Logos is beautiful and divine. You can be sure of that. You're the right sort of chap. You're in the right game. Got a good nature. Whereas on the other hand, you must collect the self, thyself. That means the highest part of yourself. Not your ego, not your image, not your physical body. Collect the highest part of yourself together. How? By exercising in that way that appears to be useless by everyone else, by the many. What everyone calls empty talk. Do that. For if you do not, while you're still young, the truth will utterly elude you. Those are the stakes. Do this exercise that most people will say is a waste of time, but if you don't, you will not reach the truth. Same problem we have today, right? Socrates says, in what way is this exercise? The way that you've just heard Zeno practicing, except I was also quite pleased with what you said to him, because you would not allow him to look upon the wandering that exists among the objects of sight, nor the wandering that exists in relation to them, but to consider according to those which one can grasp, especially by the logos. And in this way, you would be led to see the ideas. It's not a physical exercise. You grasp it with the logos and you can be led to experience the ideas yourself. Socrates says, well, it appears to me that in this way it may indeed be shown without difficulty that the beings experience both like and unlike and everything else that exists eternally. Eternal existence. Parmenides says quite rightly indeed, but it is also necessary that, besides these, you should still also suppose the following. Consider not only the consequences resulting from the hypothesis whether each idea exists. You're hypothesizing, you're creating an if. It's like a what if. That's why I was talking about Spider-Man before. Like, they have a Marvel what if. What if Spider-Man was, I don't know, Green Lantern or something? What if the ideal of beauty exists, but also create the alternate universe? What universe would follow if there was not a true being of beauty? What would happen? That's the exercise. That's the hypothesis. So if beauty was all based on physical, subjective experience, let's say if beautiful Jenny who goes to your, I don't know, coffee shop, all of a sudden she gets into an accident and she's not beautiful anymore, does that mean beauty itself is less beautiful? Because beauty is just a combination of all physical expressions of beauty? That sounds crazy. Beauty itself is becoming ugly because of stunning Jenny? So that's the exercise. That's like what if. So we're being like Stan Lee, but in the higher sense. And the word for that is anagogic, the higher expression, the higher use. So consider what would follow if they exist and if they don't exist, if the ideal self of these ideas do not exist. If you wish to be exercised in this way. Socrates says, in what way do you mean? Like how do I create this universe? And now he's outlining. So now we're at the part, this is where we're together. This is how you do it. There seems to be, looking at it, 4 exercises. That's the philosophical quest called Dialectics. To awaken your soul, awaken your nous, awaken yourself to the higher realms of reality that the many call useless. Now, he gives the 4 exercises, but he doesn't lay it out like a textbook. He gives us what we need to do the work ourselves. And that's what we've been doing. Trying to put together the structure that we need to do. So far, we have seen 3 of the 4. We've got 1 more to go. We looked at the first one. You should exercise yourself in the same hypothesis which Zeno, my student. Zeno is about 40, Socrates is 19, Parmenides is 60. So there's a triad there. Interesting. Zeno hypothesized if the many beings that we've been talking about actually do exist, what must result in that universe? For the many selves, many beings, so selves has the higher meaning, the self of beauty. So if the many beings have an existence in this way, what results for the many selves in relation to the selves and in relation to the one, which is an even higher level. Everything, even the ideas, are one. So one is even beyond being. And again, what will happen if the many beings exist? What will happen for the one in relation to itself and in relation to those many beings? So what will happen for the beings if they exist? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to their cause? But also, how does the one relate to itself, and how does the one relate to them if it exists? Both if the selves exist, if the many beings exist, what will result to the many in relation to themselves and the one? And again, if the many beings exist, what must result for the one in relation to itself and to the many? And in turn, if the many beings do not exist, what will happen in relation to the one, to the many, both in relation to themselves and each other? That's a big, word salad. Plus it's in Greek, so ancient Greek as well. So we unpacked that to this thing here. The first exercise of the 4 we need to do if we want to see the truth. If the many beings exist, what happens in this universe for those many beings, the many selves, in relation to themselves? Number 1, the many selves in relation to the one, that's the higher cause. The one in relation to itself, and the one in relation to those many beings. We pointed out there's a structure here. Oh, and the same thing if it doesn't exist. If the many do not exist, what will happen for the one in relation to itself? This one. The one in relation to the many in relation to itself, and the one, these two here. So same thing. Same 4 elements are part of the universe that you create in this exercise. For if it exists and if it doesn't exist. And then we talk about how that's important, because why even go on this great quest? Why accept Harry Potter's call to the magical world? Why, if you're Luke Skywalker, would you leave the moisture farm and go into the greater galaxy? If you don't think that there is even such a thing as being. If you're practical, physical, it's just the physical world, shut up. Why even go to all that effort? So that's why the first exercise is about this. And now you have a little essay for yourself. Well, if they do exist, this universe happens. But also if they do not exist, all these things happen. So you can see, well, which universe do I live in? So even if I don't yet know these beings yet, I could see logically, rationally, intelligently that one of these 2 universes must be true and one of them can't be true. That's our first exercise, the beginning of the quest. We looked at how there's a structure here. If the subject, which in the Greek we can call self, if self exists, in this particular instance, if the many beings exist, what will happen for the self in relation to itself, the many to itself? How will it relate to others? Self to others, many selves to the one, others to others. How will the one relate to itself, and other back to self? So we've got self and other. We can summarize the dialectic in 2 elements. And likewise, we saw if the subject does not exist, what follows for the subject in relation to itself. So we use Spider-Man to talk about this. Because what you can do is after you've done this is you can mythologize it. You can tell a story using characters you like or invent your own to help remember it better. Or communicate it to your friends if you're an artist. You don't have to say it directly, which might be a bit of hard work for people, but you can create characters that represent each of these ideas. That's what true mythology is. Actual, like the archetype, the ideal of mythology, that's what it is. So if you said, okay, I'm talking about whether the many beings exist, but I like Spider-Man. I'm going to write a what if of Spider-Man. What if Spider-Man exists? The first category is how does Spider-Man relate to himself? How does Spider-Man think about his outfit? How does he think about being a hero? What does he think about living in New York? Then your story will continue. How does he relate to one of the others? Pick one of the others. In this particular one, they've already given us what the other is. It's the one. which is a higher reality. So, who's above Spider-Man in that universe? Professor X, maybe? Who's the Watcher? Let's say the Watcher. How does Spider-Man self relate to a higher cause? How does Spider-Man relate to the Watcher? Self to other. And then if Spider-Man exists in this universe, how will the Watcher relate to himself? What does the Watcher think about himself, given that Spider-Man's around? Does he think he's being a good Watcher by letting Spider-Man, I don't know, beat up poor people? Call them criminals and beat them up? And what will happen if Spider-Man exists in relation to... what will happen for the other, the Watcher, in relation to Spider-Man? What will Watcher do now that he's seen Spider-Man running around beating up poor people in New York? Or saving, I don't know, money for rich people, whatever he does. Likewise, we create another what-if universe if he doesn't exist. If Spider-Man does not exist. In this particular instance, it's a mythology of what if the many beings don't exist. If Spider-Man doesn't exist, he's just an idea. Like in our world, right? If Spider-Man was just a fictitious concept and didn't have his own existence, how would he relate to himself? Well, he wouldn't really. He's not Deadpool. He doesn't know he's a comic book character. He would be deluded. So he'd write a story about Spider-Man being dumb and ignorant and deluded. He doesn't know he's a comic book character. If he doesn't exist, well, how would he relate to the Watcher? He would get too stressed. He wouldn't realize that the Watcher, or maybe the author of Spider-Man, how does he make the one be represented by the comic book writer? How would he relate to the author? He wouldn't. There'd be a disconnection there. There's no communication. Deadpool might be a bit different, but this is what we talked about. So this exercise, same structure for likeness. If likeness is a one, so now that we've got all of the beings existing in our first exercise, now Parmenides says pick out one of them. In fact, I'm going to give you the one. Do likeness. Pick out likeness. Do an essay on likeness. Let's read it. If one should hypothesize if likeness exists or does not, there's our two universes. What will result for each hypothesis for both the selves being hypothesized, in this case, likeness, and to the others, the other beings, both in relation to themselves and each other. So we saw here, from the text, we're trying to read the text as closely as we can. The self being hypothesized is likeness. Oh, I should be on the right screen. Self hypothesizes likeness. How will it relate to self? How will it relate to other? And the others, how will itself relate to self and likeness? How will likeness relate to itself? Likeness relate to itself. How will likeness relate to others? The other ideas. How will others relate to others? How will those other ideas relate to themselves? And how will others relate back to the subject being hypothesized? How will others relate back to likeness? It's the second exercise. We see the same structure. Self, 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 others, others, self. Only this time, it isn't interdimensional. It isn't how do the beings relate to the cause of the one. It's within the same dimension. The others are all the other ideas. Now we're on to the third one. I'm out of coffee. All right. We'll summarize the third one. So we're all together, then I'll have a break, have some coffee, and we'll do the last one. So I think there's only 4. This is our map. This is the guide that's going to guide our whole philosophical journey. If you're open to it, if this is awakened, if this is spoken to your soul or your mind or your heart or something, and you're like, fuck, I want to do this, then this is going to be our roadmap. As we go and learn more, we're going to learn more facts about Spider-Man. We're going to learn more facts about the Watcher. We're going to learn more facts about how to write we're learning how to write the story that we're going to add the facts we learn into. It's not like school where they throw you opinions and are like, just here's a mess of spaghetti, do with it what you will. No, there's a structure so you can go along and you can apply it to yourself and use it and know what to do with everything as you learn. We don't know about what likeness is yet. We don't know what the many is yet, or the one is yet, or what this one is unlikeness and motion and rest and we don't know these things. All we know is that they're ideas. But then we're going to read the rest of the text. We're just at the introduction. He's helping us so much by showing us the structure. The third one is this one. Let's read it in the text first before we summarize it. The same logos must be applied to the unlike, to motion, to rest, to generation, to dissolution, and the existence and non-existence of those selves. Again, if it does exist, if it doesn't exist. And in one logos, in one essay, concerning that which you hypothesize as being and as not being, if it exists or it doesn't, and anything else that undergoes any experience whatsoever, anything you can think of now, make sure you hit those 5, but now do anything that has an experience. Hey, you experience coldness, try and do an essay on coldness. One must consider the consequences in relation to itself. Is there a self of coldness? Is there a pure being of coldness? And in relation to any of the others being considered that you may set up for this purpose. Now pick out one. How does coldness relate to motion? Or how does generation relate to beauty? How does justice relate to beauty? That's a good one. So you got to pick out a main character, pick out an other, but also do it in relation to many. Not just one superhero, but all of the beings, the whole of it. Because many, from our first exercise, we know as the many beings. That was the first exercise we did, right? And also in relation to everything. Now we're going down a dimension. So the first one was, how do the many beings relate to themselves and its cause, the one? The second one, how does likeness relate to the other beings? And now how does these different ideas relate to themselves? A particular idea, the whole of the idea, and also things. And that's what we summarized here. Whoop. If. Hypothesis, right? If. What if? If likeness, unlikeness, if motion, if rest, if generation, if dissolution. These are different essays. Exist? What will happen for self to self? That's the same as other ones. Self to self, self to others, 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 of the self. Same thing here. SS, SO, OO, OS. SS, SO, OO, OS. Same structure. Only here it changes. Self in relation. Let's get a different color pen. For each of these ones, let's make I like Spider-Man. Let's say you're going to represent unlikeness with Spider-Man again. If Spider-Man exists eternally, what will happen for him in relation to himself? How will he relate to himself, his shoes, his webs, what it means to be a hero? How will he relate to others? A specific one you set up. So how is Spider-Man going to relate to Superman or Captain America? Pick one. So, how will unlikeness relate to dissolution? I'm going to pick those two as my key ones. That's going to be my story. That's the main story I'm going to write about. How does unlikeness relate to dissolution in the realm of being? Or how does Spider-Man relate to Captain America in the realm of Avengers? Then, how does unlikeness or Spider-Man relate to all of the superheroes, all of the beings? It's the same realm. They're all superheroes. So how does it relate to the whole of it, the many of them? We know many is all of the beings from our first exercise. And then finally, how does Spider-Man relate to all of the people of New York, all of the people of Earth, who are not superheroes in the realm of being, they're just the everything. So this is a new kind of exercise. Before it was self to self, self to others. Then how would Captain America relate to himself? So the story would continue about Captain America's backstory. And then how would Captain America relate to Spider-Man? And so then the movie would be about how Captain America thinks about being, a hero who's against Spider-Man. And then he would have to somehow go back and fight Spider-Man at the end of the movie. Sounds like a good movie. But this is different. This isn't about, like the other ones, like how does many relate to one, or how does likeness relate to the other Avengers? It's all about Spider-Man this time. It's all about these ideas and any idea you can think of that you're interested in. Hey, you're interested in infinity? Do this exercise on infinity. How does infinity relate to what? What else are you interested in? I'm interested in truth. Okay, great. This for exercise 3, do an essay, a logos, on how does infinity relate to itself? Everything you've learned about infinity so far. In all of your ideally Platonic text, because Plato and Socrates and Parmenides, they had a high level of understanding of the truth of these things. There's also other people like Plotinus, Damascus, Proclus, people within the Greek tradition, before it got killed by the Dark Ages and the Romans. So everything you learn, but you could learn it from all different sources, right? But try and get it as true as you can. And everything you've known, because you're interested in infinity maybe. Everything you've learned about infinity. That's the first part. How does infinity relate to itself? Talk about infinity itself. Then keep your story going. What else are you interested in? Oh, I'm really interested in, truth. How does, did I say, forget it. Let's say truth. I'm also interested in truth as well as infinity. So how does infinity relate to truth? The second part of your essay. Now, how does infinity relate to all of the other beings that you have learned about? Not only have I learned about truth, hey, I learned a little bit about rest itself. I've learned a little bit about generation itself. I mean, that's all because I'm kind of new to philosophy, but still, everything I know about the beings is going to be the next part of my essay on infinity. And then the last part of your essay, how does infinity relate to everything in the world that I experience every day? If infinity exists, how does it relate to the sun? How does it relate to numbers? How does it relate to, because, aren't numbers infinite? And if infinity doesn't exist, what would happen to numbers? It'd be some sort of, you create some sort of absurd universe that if infinity didn't exist, because we do this for what exists, and also what follows if does not exist. Same thing, but what if it doesn't not? So that's the other universe you create. So, right, so you're interested in infinity? Oh, okay, how does it relate to itself? How does it relate to a truth? I like truth. How does it relate to all of the beings that I've learned so far? And as you go, you can add more and more. It's you constantly turning around, reflecting on itself, improving itself. Your essay mirrors you. You're always reflecting on yourself. You're always getting better. You might learn something new, and you can apply that new thing to your other abilities, your other skills, your other interests. Hey, I learned how to kick a soccer ball better, but I can also apply that to how I can kick a rugby ball better. Same thing here. Or I learned how to, I don't know, I could think of a video game analogy too, but you get the idea. So how does infinity relate to all of the ideas? And then how does infinity relate to everything in the world? What would happen? How does infinity relate to sunlight or numbers or making toast in the morning? Whatever it is that you're interested in the everyday world. And also what follows if it doesn't exist? What would happen to numbers if there was no such being as infinity? So it's a different kind of a movie. How does Spider-Man relate to himself, Captain America, all the Avengers, and all the people of New York? It's really a Spider-Man story now. So, we've got one more to go. I'm going to take a break, have a coffee, I have some lunch, because it's been a 3-hour stream so far. But I want to finish this today, because it's freaking amazing. It's like, it's so good. It's a golden chalice. It's the holy grail for us as human beings. We did the first essay on why there has to be something called the Avengers and how it relates to Stan Lee, who made them. So we know that there has to be something called the Avengers. Then we picked out one of them, likeness. So now that we know that there is the Avengers, how does Spider-Man? So now we make the first. Spider-Man movie. How does Spider-Man relate to himself? How does Spider-Man relate to the other Avengers? Now that we know that the Avengers exist. No, our first movie is on the Avengers. Why they have to exist. Maybe how it relates to I don't know. Why the Avengers existed and how it relates to who made the Avengers. How it relates to that guy with the eye patch. What's his name? He doesn't like snakes on a plane. The guy who makes the Avengers, the creator of the Avengers. So now that he makes the Avengers in the first movie, we make our second movie about Spider-Man. How he relates to himself, how he thinks about being Spider-Man, how he relates to the Avengers, how the Avengers relate to each other now that Spider-Man's in the group. And then how do they relate back to Spider-Man? Maybe they have a big fight with Spider-Man because they don't like him in the Avengers for some reason. That's the second movie. Third movie is how Spider-Man relates to Spider-Man, but then how he relates to one of the others. How he relates to Captain America. It's a big feud between him and Captain America. Oh, no. It's Tony Stark, Iron Man, the leader of... Oh, I guess Captain America is kind of the leader. No, Tony Stark, the leader of the Avengers. Maybe they have a big fight. And then how does after he has a big fight with Tony Stark, how does he then relate to the rest of the Avengers in the third movie? And now how does he relate to all the people? Which sounds like one of those Spider-Man. Now he has a big fight with all of the Avengers. Now everyone in the world hates him. Like that end of that other Spider-Man movie. How he relates to all the people. This is a different dimension. They're not superheroes. They're not Avengers. So how does he relate to the lower? Self? People like? One of the ones like himself? All of the ones like himself? And all of the ones lower than himself? So for us it would be, what happens for our physical world if generation exists, and then if it does not exist too? Those are the two essays we do. So those are the three things that we've got so far on the agenda. We got one more, and once we get down, hopefully we'll go into the text more, and Parmenides will start giving us some information about these things. Hopefully he'll outline what the heck is beings and manyness and generation and likeness and Spider. Well, no, he won't talk about Spider-Man. That's just a funny joke. But he'll talk about the ideas that we can use to populate our universe, write our exercises. Why? Why go through all this effort? Why do all this stuff? Why spend time on this instead of watching a Spider-Man movie? Collect yourself together in this way that appears useless to those who are more interested in Marvel movies than many, and they call this empty talk. If you do not, the truth will elude you. If you do, you'll be able to grasp by the logos and be led to see these ideas. That's why we care. The greatest treasure. Isn't it fantastic? And we have a map being given to us through time by Parmenides for 2,000 years ago. He's laying it out for us. Hey, join the party. Become a group of adventurers, true heroes. What the Marvel movies are actually based on, the true archetype. Join the quest, join the group. Here's how you do it. We've got 3 of the 4 parts so far. Next time we're going to come back and we're going to address the 4th part and have what we need to really enter the fray, really take on the area bosses and level up and find treasure and do all those great things. Seeking what? The truth. There we go. Do you care about the truth? If you didn't care about the truth, I don't think you would have stuck around in this video for this long. Thank you, Parmenides. Good job, everyone. I think we've got 3 of the 4. I think in that reflection, I think we've leveled up ourselves. So we've done all right. And let's, until next time, let's do the 4th one and get it all laid out.